Awesome. Thanks. And thanks, Brent, again. I mean, I love learning from guys who have done it before because, I'm a young guy and I've only been in this industry 5 years. And when I have an opportunity to be around, Coach Brent and Al, and this is how you use the tools and this is how you present and this is what you say. And it really is enlightening because look, for me, one of the things that before I got to Freedom Equity Group, I worked in retail. I worked at a supermarket, and one of the things I remember, like yesterday, this is before we knew about, the various ways to save, the new kind, the IUL, right? I remember looking at a job post and my mom saying, oh, this has great benefits. It's got medical, it's got vision, it's got dental, and it's got 401k. So you should really apply for this job and make sure you get into the benefits. See, that's what we're taught, folks, right? And that's why people are getting into trouble because we're relying on the knowledge that's been passed down from year to year to year to year. And it's worked for some people and it hasn't for others. But that's what we do. That's all we know. So that's why it's important to stay plugged in, be a student of the business, and really know where to find this information so you can get to a level where you can really educate people on what's happening today. So before I get into the needs analysis, I know Brent kind of showed this to you a little bit. Again, freedombuilderinfo.com. Go to the team login page, put in the password, all lowercase freedom. Go right under here into your toolbox. And this is where you're going to find everything that you need, right? Simple needs analysis. Here's a 401k killer right next to it, simple needs analysis. And I'm going to go through that with you. So if you click on this, just like the 401k killer, it is going to go ahead and download down here. It's an Excel sheet. You can save it to your desktop. My recommendation is that not only do you save it to your desktop, but you go ahead and print yourself a dozen copies and keep with you because you never know when you're going to be put in a position where maybe you can't access your computer or get it open or whatever. Have it so you can write it down. You can always transfer it later, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just share my needs analysis here, and hopefully this comes up no problem. All right, so we're all seeing the needs analysis. Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So great. Thank you, Al. So here's what you find. Here's your needs analysis, right? I'm just going to shrink this a little bit so we can see a little bit more. And I'm going to put this up here. Great. So what do, right? Well, there's a few things, obviously, that we need to know before we get into, asking the questions about the total need and the budget and everything like that. We need to know their age, right? We need to know if they're smokers or non-smokers or if they use tobacco in any form. Today, that doesn't just mean cigarettes. That means vape and chewing tobacco and dip and all this other stuff. So, make sure you ask the questions, right? How tall are they? How much do they weigh? These are all factors that play into how we're going to present the information, right? We can't quote a smoker at non-smoker rates because typically those are much, much higher. We've got to do our due diligence to do what's right and what's best for the client the first time. A wise man once told me, anything that's worth doing is worth doing right the first time, okay? So medical issues. Do you have any medical issues? Do you have high blood pressure, or diabetes, or this or that? And are you taking other medications? Sometimes people have had medical issues for so long that are relatively insignificant, and they don't consider it a medical issue. Somebody who's had high blood pressure for 30 years, well, maybe they don't consider it an issue because it really isn't. But then when you ask, well, do you take medication? And they say, well, yeah, I take medication for blood pressure. See, now this is why we've added that second question. If they say, yes, I do take medications, well, take notes. This is why you can print this out. You can put notes on the side and say, okay, what do you take? What is it for? How often do you take it? When did you, start taking this medication, right? So this is what I like to call housekeeping. This is, the interview. How do we get to know you? Let's make sure we get the right information to make sure that we can properly demonstrate what these plans could do. The next section is we go into the need, okay? There's two things in our business that we have to do, absolutely. Number one, we have to open people's eyes and make sure that we're giving them enough coverage. Folks, here's what I can tell you unequivocally. In the 4 or 5 years that I've been doing this, 3 full-time, essentially, in the 3 years I've been doing this full-time and the hundreds of needs analysis that I've taken over these 3 years, people do not have enough coverage for those who have coverage, right? I was just sitting with somebody yesterday who, wife, 2 kids, and yeah, Mike, I own life insurance. Great. What kind? It's through my job. I think it's, 100,000. Okay. Well, how much do you owe on your house? About 230. Well, see, right there, you know that's not enough. And so when you do this exercise with them, you really can open their eyes, and it's the right thing to do to make sure that we have total, we cover that need 100% or as close as we can based on their budget, right? So what goes into the insurance need? There are a couple of things that we have to make sure that we cover, right? What is your debt? And this is basically everything outside of your mortgage or your rent, right? Your car notes, your credit cards, your personal loans, your student loans, right? That's a big deal nowadays, right? So what are those things, and roughly how much do you think you have in those types of debts? I want the total amount. You know, I don't need it to the penny, but I need it pretty close. What do you think you have? And whatever that is, you write it down, okay? The next thing, final expenses. Look, today, on average, the average cost of a funeral is about $15,000 nationally. Well, this is a life insurance policy. Yes, I know it will pay you if you get sick, but if you pass away, well, it's going to pay your family, and there's going to need to be money there, right? And money in order to cover those expenses. Let's make sure we include that final expense piece of it. So we just go ahead and put 15,000. So I'll go ahead and do this exercise with you here. You know, I owe 25,000 in my car and 10,000 in credit cards, right? So that's 35,000 in total debt. I need 15,000 for my final expense. Okay. Now, do you own a house or do you rent it? Well, right now I own a house. Great. Mr. Client, how much do you owe on that house? I owe $230,000 on the house. Okay. Now, if they rent, we still want to cover housing expense, right? Because if they get sick, well, the landlord in the eviction process could still put them out of house if they're not able to make that rent. So with rent, I always include rent plus utilities, because it's okay to get your rent paid, but it's what good's a house if you don't got lights or hot water, right? And this is something that you need to ask, right? So if somebody tells me that they rent, I say, okay, great. This is what we need to do. We need to cover your rent for, let's say, at least 5 years, right? Or whatever it is. I usually use 5 years when it comes to rentals, okay? And what is your rent? What are your utilities on average? We got to make sure that that's covered so you can maintain the quality of life. If they own a house, then just take the balance of the mortgage. That makes it really easy, right? Now, education, we recommend $100,000 per child. And that's usually a pretty good baseline depending upon, you know, where they feel their child may land. If they're going to get scholarship, like there are a lot of variables, right? We don't know. They may go to school for free, they may not, but typically, $100,000 will cover in-state tuition for most states around the country. If they go to an in-state university, college, that will cover them. So we want to make sure that there's something for your kids to be able to pay for that education. Look, folks, if you get sick and yes, you pay off your debt and yes, you pay off the house, well, how are you providing the income stream to save for your college education for your children? Well, sometimes you can't, right? You may be out of work 8 months, a year, 2 years, however long, right? Well, let's include some of this education in there too. So they have a couple of kids, they're 10 and 8. Okay, well, we need at least $200,000 there for coverage, right? Now, there's no law that says we can't get more in the future, but let's try and get you what you need today and go forward. Now, income replacement, okay? This is a tricky one. You know, if they got kids, let's say they're 10 and 8 years old, well, you need to cover that income until the youngest kid becomes a legal adult. So this would be 10 years, right? We got to replace your income for 10 years. Well, if they make whatever, $50,000, right? And I'll put that here in the notes, $50,000 a year. Okay, well, what's that times 10? Well, it's 500,000. Okay, so Mr. Client, here's what we know. We know in order to make sure your debts are paid, we know in order to make sure your house gets paid for, we know to make sure to cover your kids' education and replace your income until your youngest one is of age at 18 years old, you need about $980,000 worth of coverage. Now, Mr. Client, you said you own life insurance today, right? Yes, how much is that? Well, it's $250,000. Well, you can see, I'm glad that you took the steps to protect your family, but you can see, frankly, it's just not enough. Right? So let's see if we can get you what you need and add that layer of protection called living benefits, the plan that you don't have to die to use. Does that make sense? Of course it does. Okay, great. So now that we've determined the need, well, now let's determine where the money's going to come from, right? Are you messing around in the stock markets, bonds, mutual funds? Are you doing a significant amount? And in my experience, most people say, no, I don't mess with that, right? Now, they don't know they mess with that if they have a 401k, but outside of that, they're not really doing anything. So I go ahead and put 0 here. You own life insurance? Yes, I do. Great. How much do you pay for it on a monthly basis? Well, I pay about $200 a month. Okay, fair. We'll take that 200. Now your contributions, right? What are you putting in your 401k? Well, you know, I'm putting 5% of my salary or 6% of my salary or whatever the case may be. Okay, well, if that's the number they give you, you can bust out a calculator and you can find out what that contribution is. You know, in this little notes here, I know it says match. I'll just put a yes and I'll put a percentage if it is, right? They match 5%. And then in little outside over here, I'll say they're putting 5% of their salary. And then I go ahead and make that calculation and put that number in there and say, okay, well, we found out that it's whatever, $200 a month there too. You're putting $200 a month into your 401k. Okay. Now, Mr. Klein, with all that said, you got $250 right now. We need to get you $980. How much can you afford to put away every month? You know, last week, Brent nailed, and it hit me square between the eyes last week. You can't skip this question, folks, because you never know what people will say. Brent had an example last week, and he said, hey, listen, sir, how much can you afford to put away? And the guy said, well, probably about $1,000. That's a big deal, right? So we asked this question, hey, listen, Mr. Klein, how much do you think you could afford to put away for your future? And he says, well, you know what, Mike, I could probably do another $100. Okay, no problem. Well, we know we have $500 to work with, okay? So now we determined the need, we have the budget, and we can go back and make sure that we put a couple of options together for the client, okay? Now, last down here, this is where you can get some information to use that 401k calculator, right? This first line right here where it says qualified funds. Mr. Klein, you've been with your job 10 years now. Do you know how much you have in your 401k? Yeah, in fact, I got my last statement. It's $10,000. That's what I have in my 401k. Great. Listen, with that said, did you have any other old 401ks from old jobs or old IRAs or anything like that that you kind of forgot about and just sitting out in cyberspace? And a lot of times people say yes. Hey, yeah, you know what? In fact, I got one from a job. I just got a letter from them actually, and they said I got about $8,000 or $10,000 in that account. Folks, understand that they're not making contributions to that anymore, right? That's just money that's sitting out there that's at risk, that's being charged fees that they'll have to pay the tax on. We can do something better with that. So make sure you take notes of that. Look, do you have any old college funds, the 529 plans, any bonds that you have or that you cashed in, right? Is your life insurance policy a whole life or a cash value type policy? If so, how much do you have in there? And as far as non-retirement funds, you know, CDs or anything like that, mutual funds that you're just kind of not using, they're just kind of were set up for you that are sitting there. Let's put all that information. Let's get a comprehensive look, right? So we can determine what's going to be the best fit. Now, once I take all this information, if they're in my office, I can say, listen, if you got 30 minutes, I can put this together for you and I can give you option A, B, and C. We can go over it together. If I'm meeting them at a Starbucks, here's what I'm doing. I got the needs analysis and I say, okay, Mr. Client, I'm available on Wednesday and Friday. When's a better day for us to get together and we can go over this information in detail? And I set the appointment, right? And then I go back, I do what I have to do, and then once I go and see him, I have options A, B, and C, and I line them up and I present it to him and say, okay, Mr. Client, based on your need, based on your budget, these are the options that we came up with. Let me explain to you why this one's good, why this one's better, and why this one, in my opinion, is the best, if you can get 3 options, right? So this is what we do. This is a tool, right? There's an old expression in everything, right? Garbage in, garbage out. The better you get at collecting data, the better you get at gathering information, the better you get at making sure that information is as accurate as possibly can, the better the results will be on the back end, okay? So get really, really good at this. Folks, here's the other thing. You don't need a license to collect data. So as a brand new person, you should get really good at a couple things. Number 1, introducing people to the information through your coach and trainer, right? Number 2, being a master of being a messenger. Don't be the message, be the messenger. And number 3, you should get really good at collecting data because everything else is really simple. I mean, we saw the software over the last few days. Once you mess with the last few weeks, once you start to play with that software, it gets really, really familiar. It gets really, really easy to use. But until you get really good at collecting data, the software is only going to give you good results if you put good data in. So I hope this helped you. You know, again, Freedom Builder info, team login, lowercase, all lowercase, the password is freedom. Go to your toolbox, download your needs analysis, get a couple, practice, right? Call your brother, call your sister, call your coach, practice if you haven't done this before. And, you know, I really appreciate you taking the time. I love these Monday morning trainings because they're just really helping solidify all the information that we need. So with that, Al, I'll turn it back over to you.